We start to share information early in the process, and it's up to me to show a level of expertise that's helping them before we're even contracted.
Welcome to Clicks and Bricks Podcast. We talk about the entrepreneur mindset.
If you get one shot at this, what kind of shot are you going to take?
If we forget who we are, they're going to forget who you are.
You've got an adversity story that's out of this world.
Everything from that Main Street brick and mortar to that billion-dollar manufacturer.
Introduce yourself and what is Rhino Consulting Partners?
Sure. So my name is Darrell Stempke, and I run Rhino Consulting Partners. We are a cost reduction firm. So I know that people don't feel super excited about saving money, but I hope to change that perception today because I think we should be much more excited about it. And we save money on the indirect or non-trade expenses. So think of things like raw materials that you're using to build furniture. If you're selling furniture, that's not the stuff I'm talking about. I'm talking about the warehouse and the racking and the forklifts and the computers, all of the indirect expense that people just don't quite pay enough attention to.
Right. So back office expense, rent, HVAC units, generators, air conditioners, all that kind of the bigger facilities management stuff.
I've negotiated contracts in probably over 100 different areas, I'm sure, over my career.
Okay, that is interesting stuff. So you said people aren't excited about saving money. Who isn't excited about? They're just not excited about saving money is what you find?
No one is excited about saving money. I'll tell you why. Think about, as a consultant, I have to put everything in a 2x2 quadrant. I heard a great example of this today. But you have, on a 2x2 quadrant, how mission critical something is that your company does versus how important is it for customers to want to work with you. Right? So saving money doesn't fall into the correct quadrant. I mean, it's almost in the quadrant of outsource it or use an expert. Now, the things you buy could be mission critical because you might not be able to do business without having working computers or software. But as a whole sourcing organization, to save money isn't what's going to keep the lights on tomorrow, unless you hit a crazy recession. In 2008, all of a sudden everybody cared about it. But, our economy is growing to a point that nobody has to look at the bottom line in that regard. Bombs dropped on Ukraine, 6-7 weeks ago? Right. I think our market is up 6 or 7% since. So yes. I don't think there's anything that could happen that's not going to create a higher level of competition in our economy. So people are focused on innovating and what can they do to kind of win deals. That's where the focus is.
Right. I find the same thing in the sales side, right? When I'm trying to sell high product, high dollar services, if it's just saving a CFO money and it's a mission critical piece, they don't even want to talk about it if that's your only value proposition, right? When you're trying to sell a new product. So I have it here and it works, and I know this is a key part of my business, so I don't want to change anything because this works. And if I might change it and save some money, but it could destroy my manufacturing or my facilities or something else along the line. So it seems weird that on the surface you would say, hey, I can save you money. People would be like, heck yes, let's do that. More saving money means more money in my pocket. But you do it through negotiate. Do you renegotiate contracts for people as well?
Yeah. So what I run is what's called the strategic sourcing process. So I know you're kind of unemployable in the way that you've worked your career, but if you worked at $1 billion company, right, you're going to have a team called strategic sourcing. And what that group does is they will go through to analyze the spend and the contracts that exist in the company and find out where, we're buying forklifts from 3 different companies. Let's take all of the requirements for that and go out and do a more formalized bid to reduce expenses. Right. So in that process, you're going to negotiate costs, but it's also to find out what market price is too, right? Because you and I don't know what is the going rate for a forklift. What's the going rate for a ream of paper? That is always ever changing. Right. So part of the objective is to get what is market price, right? So then you're negotiating that contract, but with a strategic sourcing organization, you're probably looking at trying to save between 3 and 5% of your total spend, which isn't that sexy of a number, but you got to understand that it might be your 5th time around negotiating your security services contract. So you're negotiating against how great did previous Darrell do? That's my benchmark of where I'm starting from this next go around.
Right.
And unless your company's having huge growth, you're not really going to result in having, a lot more leverage when negotiating if you've already done the leverage spent exercise.
Yeah, and for me, I've been fortunate enough in IT. I've worked with hundreds or thousands of different companies in all the different verticals, right? So I'm aware of, for me, I buy a lot of air conditioners, generators, and things of that nature, and it's always a tedious process. And I know, how many companies do you think out there? I know that we buy a lot of air conditioners for our companies, right? And my predecessor would always be like, "Oh, we use Bob. We use Bob to buy our air conditioners. Why do we use Bob? Because he's a broker. He gets us the best price." But we've been using Bob for 20 years, right? And we're afraid to even talk to Bob about pushing him on price or having competitive bids. Is that the norm for a lot of businesses, that they just get stuck in the, oh, this is who we order from? And they stop, and then scope creep or price creep happens to them. And now they're paying a lot of times above industry standard.
Yeah, and there's some things that Bob does that's going to align with what the company needs are.
Right.
There's something Bob's going to do that's going to benefit Bob's HVAC services.
Well, he
more
takes
than
Jimmy
you.
bowling every Friday is really what happens.
Yeah. and those relationships will exist. And sometimes Bob might not know exactly what market price is. So, at the last company I was at, we had, dozens and dozens of warehouses, right? But what we wanted to know is, what is the aggregate spends purchasing volume able to do? So where we can help Bob is, Bob might be only working with the facilities that are in Florida, and he might have some capabilities to drop ship nationwide. But Bob doesn't take the guy from Henderson bowling or the guy from LA bowling because he's too far away. So we can actually help Bob by showing him, here's how big the real opportunity is if we consolidate spend. And sometimes Bobs get priced out because they can't really compete on a national scale, but that's for a corporation to decide. Are they going to fund their, bowling friends, or are they going to do what's right for the business too? So it's a fine line. And I get that if Bob has come out and saved the day a couple times because the air conditioner broke when it was 105 degrees, and he himself came out that day within 25 minutes to fix it, absolutely, there's value in that,
Right.
So
absolutely, yeah.
Price
So
isn't the only thing you look at.
The guy that's servicing it is also something you need to look at, but those service contracts can be steep, right? And there's other ways, like for example, I know that I've paid a service contract to a company before to maintain air conditioners, right? Say $20,000 a month, and you maintain all these air conditioners. Or I could just buy an insurance policy for those air conditioners as well, and that might be cheaper to just insure them for any break fix. And I don't do full parts and labor, I just do just the labor part, right? So is that the kind of negotiate and like work around and strategic stuff that you can put together for companies?
Right. And so if you and I were to sit down and talk about those types of contracts, we look at what the different options are. We would ask all the vendors that are in the RFP to bid on the different scenarios. And then what makes me special is that I can make Excel sing you a lullaby. I can make breakfast with Excel. So whatever those options are, I can show you a really clear bottom line effect for you. So you can decide option A, B, or C with confidence, So a lot of times, when I send out an RFP request, I'll have a spreadsheet I want them to put it in. And, Bob maybe has never used Excel before, who knows? So I have to do my best to kind of translate what that means to a bottom line, because things, costs are all hidden. It's hard to understand what that full total cost of ownership might be for those units.
Right. All right. I want to do one more question on kind of a larger company and then bring it back down. It's very common that a larger company will take a lease out, large amount of space for a building or something like that. And they're in that lease supporting a customer or two customers, or a subset of customers. And that business model doesn't work anymore, but they've got 6 years left on their lease, right? What are some of the ways that you would approach saving that person money on that lease?
Well, it would depend on the lease. So it's, I can remember when I was first working in consulting, and I worked for a firm for the first 10 years of my career. And there was a very young gentleman on our team that was as cowboy as it gets, shoot from the hip all the time. And we had a client that had a bunch of copiers that were under lease, and they had mentioned that they wanted to get out of these agreements. And the very young associate, who is the most junior person in the room, just says, no problem. Send me those contracts. I'll get you out of them. And so we had to backpedal. I was like, well, hold on. It depends on what the terms and conditions are. Like, we'd have to find what the right solution could be.
Right.
And sometimes if you're locked into those, you're kind of stuck. So with a lease, I'd probably be looking at what subleasing opportunities do you have, because honestly, if you had too much warehouse space right now, it's a fantastic problem to have right now, because the warehousing commercial real estate industry is bonkers.
Right.
So your broker would prefer to have you out. So you could give them an option to say, hey, if you want to lease this out to somebody else, they'd be able to do that at the then current rates and extend term out longer than where you're at. So they might give you an out if you're willing to drop out.
Right.
So I talk to them and negotiate with the broker to see what they want to do. Or you could just get into the subleasing business. You know, the last company that I worked at had millions and millions of square feet of warehouse space, and they leased it all, long-term 10, 20-year leases. I'm sure if they could go back in time to the 90s, they would have said, buy it instead. And, you know, it's a multi-billion-dollar company, but they can make billions of dollars another way right now if they wanted to, if they had just purchased a space. Right. So, you know, there's a lot of different ways to look at it. But the point is like, I probably want to be able to come in and say, I got all the answers, but let's talk about it and think about it and see what could exist as an option for you, you know?
Yeah. And I think my best advice there is just ask. Like, take your craziest, most bizarre question that you can come up with, like the dream scenario for you, and ask. And then maybe that's, hey, will you just let me out of this lease, or can I sublease it? Or do you have any tenants that are looking for this kind of space? And you'd be surprised at even how bizarre you make your ask. You think there's no way they'd ever go for that. It's a good starting point. You'll end up somewhere in the middle generally, right? It's a...
And what you're doing there, Ken, is very good, pure negotiation techniques. Because I think the mistake most people make in negotiation is they just think it's stating positions. You know, when you watch on a movie and they're negotiating something, they're giving each other steely stare downs. They're doing mic drop comments. They're being super clever. And, you know, that's not the way it really works in real life. So instead,
they can see through all that posturing, right? It's posturing, it's peacocking, and it's very transparent. It's,
I mean, it looks pretty cool in a movie. You know, if Gordon Gekko negotiated the way I do, you wouldn't have Wall Street. It wouldn't be a fun, interesting movie anymore. You know, it'd be boring. It'd be like watching a seminar.
Yeah, I'd be watching a whole bunch of emails go back and forth.
Yeah, so for that client, like the goal of negotiating that most people have is like there's a style of negotiating that's called distributive marketing. The easy way to visualize that is like you have a pie that you're sharing amongst a group of people. Right. So if we have 8 of us sitting at a table and we got one pie, and I say I want to have a bigger piece of pie, that means everybody else gets less, right? So in that case, that's the way most people think about distributive negotiating, and that's the case a lot of times when you're buying a car. The less I pay, the less they get. I'm going to get the same car either way, probably, right?
Right.
So what you do to take that next step is to look at it beyond that and figure out what are the interests of all the parties, right? And you can't find out the interests if you're not listening, if you're not asking questions. So I would go to the broker. First question I probably ask them is say, hey, I think we have too much space. Have you had any other clients with this problem? Yes or no, right? What did they do? How were you able to help them? Then they're telling you it's like a behavioral, interview question. You're finding out what they did or would do, and say like, what would be better for you in this scenario? Like, what would be some ways that we can improve this for you? You start asking those questions, and then you can start to uncover whether it would make sense for them to let you out. And you could be flexible on it because you might be stuck for 5 years, whether you want to be there or not. You can say, well, if we can work something out to sublease this or to find another partner, what can we do to do that? And you can
sometimes subleasing it for less than you're paying sometimes is a lesser loss.
Yeah. Right. And then think about like how the used car market went insane over the last year. Like you started getting flyers from people that were selling their car back to the dealership for more than they paid for it 3 years ago. Like the market just went insane. So I'd want to find out, is that what real estate market is like right now? Because you and I probably aren't doing a heck of a lot of commercial real estate deals, but that's a good question to ask to find out like the value of this might be higher. Would you first question might be, would you pay to buy me out of this because the market has gone up so much?
Right.
Maybe you could turn what you think is like your biggest fear if you're going to get stuck with a payment for 5 years. Now instead, you just got paid to get out of your problem, you know?
Right.
So,
and don't be afraid to ask those questions or position those kinds of structures, right? Because I feel like this happens to me all the time. People present to me what they think I'll accept or what will make me happy, right? And they don't ask me questions. They're just giving me information that thinks will make me happy, but I could maybe go 7 different other ways, right? But we didn't have an open, honest conversation about it, so I just agreed to whatever bizarre thing that they asked me to do. And I could have went way lower and I might have went way higher, but we didn't discuss it. And it was just, I don't think it's a good way to go, right? So open, honest conversation has been my approach to all my negotiation. And I've negotiated probably not as many contracts as you have, but I've had a fair number of negotiating my way out of companies that were underwater and to get them back above water. It's scary, but it's a lot of fun as well. Right.
Yeah.
But,
and what's interesting, you mentioned how there could be 7 different solutions to move forward. Most people try to go too quickly. They get an idea. Okay, let's figure out how we can make that work. And so what's better is you get an idea. It's like, okay, that's a good idea. Let's write that down. What else? Just keep asking
right.
What else? And silence is the key. Like you gotta be quiet and listen. I almost said shut up there. I don't know how PG-13 this podcast gets.
We get pretty, we've gone a little R occasionally, but they'll bleep if we have to. So,
yeah.
okay.
I the last podcast I did, they dropped an F-bomb, I think, in the intro. I was like, oh, okay.
Oh, wow. That's, we're a little more PG-13 than that, by far. But, okay. So I've got some ideas in my head of your ideal client. But before we talk about your ideal client, how much revenue do you think a company, I've got companies that are like, $250,000, $500,000, and they're just, there's 5 vendors, right? There's just not a whole lot of moving parts to those smaller companies. So how much revenue should a company have before a service like yours starts to make sense?
I mean, you're probably talking 10 figures revenue wise. It's kind of hard to measure revenue versus indirect expense because it depends a lot on the type of business, right?
Right.
So for revenue, if all that revenue is going to be in professional services types of things, then I might need to have a higher revenue perhaps. But what I look at is I measure based off of how much is in that indirect expense budget. So for me to make sense to work on a contract, probably you're talking about $250,000 of commodity expense in a certain area. And that could be split out a bunch of different vendors. But ideally you're talking like $1 million and up in spend. And then we'll do different per project. So, and usually a project will be, we start out a little green, not knowing precisely what we're going to work on because nobody ever said like, oh, we're getting hosed on XYZ contract. Every VP I've ever talked to says, we're getting a really good deal here, and I don't think you're going to be able to save any money. It's like, how do you know? Well, our rep told us. Oh, the person who is selling you is telling you a big deal. Yeah. Weird how that works. So I'll do first.
Unfortunately, this is primarily a men-dominated field, right? Where you're negotiating these larger contracts, and we have big egos, and we think we can negotiate better than others, right? And ego can destroy your negotiation. It's been my opinion or my experience that if I have too much ego and I think I've got the best deal, I probably didn't.
Well, where ego has a bigger problem too is that somebody at some point in their life got a good result from negotiating a deal. And they thought, I've got it. I've got the blueprint. And so they do that style every single time from then on.
Right.
And 2/3 of the time it won't be appropriate. Because here's the thing is the people you negotiate with are going to be different styles of negotiators. And what's interesting is people get it in sales. They understand that when you're selling something, you have to change how you're pitching your sales pitch depending on who you're talking to. Right? So as you're asking questions, you're trying to figure out what style of a salesperson is this person? What kind of buyer are they? And then you kind of change how you're selling to them. Negotiating is the same way. I got a cool way to think about it is you got 3 different styles of negotiators, right? You have an aggressive or assertive style. You got an analytical style, and you have an accommodator, okay? Alliteratives are fun. They all start with A. despite the fact they all start with A, people don't remember it, and it's hard to associate people with certain things that aren't you. Like when I mention this to people, they raise their hand quickly. So you are an aggressive, assertive style. So I give them animals instead.
Well, I'm
So
also accommodating, right? I'm a little bit of both. I'm on both sides of that fence.
And here's the thing: is you're actually all three. It depends on what you're negotiating. So you're gonna have a certain style, and you're gonna talk differently with me than you would with your best friend. You know, it's like it's you're gonna have a different style with different people. But the assertive, aggressive style I call a Rhino, and I got a whole backstory for this, and there's a connection with why we're called Rhino Consulting Partners. But the Rhino is a pretty tough animal. It's got 2-inch thick skin. You're not going to be able to fend it too much. You're not going to be able to bother it much. And once it's charging for something, you got to join it or get out of the way, right? So aggressive style is the Rhino. The analytical style is the owl. Anytime you've seen an animal wearing glasses and holding a diploma, it's always been the owl, right? So think of that as a person that if anybody's ever suffered from analysis paralysis, it is an owl. So when you're working with them, you have to give them more data and more information. And the third type is the accommodator, is a penguin. And the reason why a penguin is because they live in pods. They mate and raise families for life. They're dependent on each other. When two pods cross each other, you can see them communicate and then move on. Like they're very, very relationship driven. And that's the real estate agent that's telling you, trust me, you're going to love this house. You know, they're not giving you any comps. They're not giving you any data. They're not bulldozing you. They're more of an accommodating style. So when you're negotiating with people, you got to kind of figure out who you're working with. And you'll figure that out during the questions and how they work with stuff. If you start a call like today, you know, we got right down to business. So you're probably a little bit more aggressive, assertive, you know?
Yeah.
So, and me, I'm probably a little bit of a Rhino by nature for sure, but I'm trained to be an owl. And I think most people that know me would probably guess I'm an owl first, because I was that guy that got excited when Excel went from 65,000 lines to 1 million back in like 07 or 08. Like I was like, did you guys hear? And they're like, you use more than 65,000 lines at a time? I'm like, yeah. And it was like Christmas for me. It was great. So I love my analysis, but I'm also competitive about, you know, everything. So we were on a Zoom call yesterday. My daughter got like an award with her class, and we're on mute. And so like I'm fake clapping during it because I want to show support, but I don't need to listen to it. And I start commenting to my wife, like sitting next to me, was like, hey, these claps, they look real, don't they? And she's like, are you getting competitive about fake clapping? I'm like, oh, I got a problem. That's me.
It happens. All right.
It happens.
So $1 million ticket, $500,000 to $1 million ticket items that you could think you can save money. You're buying whatever it is, generators, U-Hauls, cars, fleets, whatever it is. You're getting ready to make that purchase, and you can call Rhino Consulting and get a lower price than what you're currently paying. So, because you don't charge anything, right? You have no upfront fees.
No, well, I charge them eventually. So the way that my fee structure works is pretty unique because consultants, I think, have a bad rap. And I think that most of them deserve it because, one, you're giving your ideas of what to do to companies, but 9 times out of 10, not helping them actually execute it. And then the other 1 out of 10 times, maybe not being able to really prove the value. So there's a little bit of selling hot air that exists in consulting, and I get it. So that's what I'm working against. So what I do is I come in, I don't have an hourly fee or a project fee. I have a gain share model to where when they save money, I bill a percentage of the savings. And my invoice will even be GL coded to whatever expense area it is that we saved money in for that particular project. So it builds right into that expense area. So if we saved you money on office supplies, you save this much and I bill you this much, you still got this much savings in there, you know? So it takes a long time to get there too, because sometimes doing the strategy and the analysis and everything up front just to decide what we're going to do could take you 4 to 6 weeks, depending how quickly the client's sharing data with me.
Right.
And then running a formal RFP project could take 3 months alone. And then I have to prove that you're saving money before I will even get an invoice to you. So I'll analyze your spend and say, here's what you paid, here's what you used to times quantity, here's what you saved. And then I bill off of that. So I need to wait another, 3 months or so for you to actually spend the money for me to actually do that. So it's like, we could be talking 8 months. So I, have opportunity to be an employee of the month for a company and be free up to that point,
Absolutely. But still, you're giving the service away for free, and you still have to overcome the CFO and the CEO's objections, right? To even open their books to you. You're an unknown quantity to them at first, right? So do you have any, and this goes for everybody out there, I don't care what product you're selling, what service you're selling, who you're selling it to, you have to figure out how to build trust with your customer. And in your particular boat, you have to build a lot of trust really, really fast at an extremely high level. What are some of the tips and tricks that you use to build trust quickly with your clients, or not even clients at that point, your potential clients, right? Because now they're going to open books to you.
Right. So we start to share information early in the process, and it's up to me to show a level of expertise that's helping them before we're even contracted. So I do some preliminary work before we're even at the stage of signing a contract. But the kind of sales process is looking like we talked about the mission critical versus the market differentiator 2x2 model, right? So up in the upper right quadrant, they need to and should be the expert. So if they're, building furniture, they need to be an expert on building furniture and how to source those materials and all those things. Nobody in the company is an expert at an office supply contract. It's just not what a business is going to have. So for those that are either just paying what they pay, or they're going through some kind of a process, but I'm getting those middle companies that don't have a 30-person sourcing team to the ones that can't really quite afford to do it anyway. So I'm in that supporting role where it's not mission critical, it's not a market differentiator for you. That is the area that, as a company, for making good decisions, you should reduce, eliminate, automate, or outsource. So I become the outsourcing partner for that.
Right.
And the reason you do it isn't even because you feel like you have a huge problem in your expenses. I can prove quickly you do. But the reason you do is because you need to have funding in order to be working in that upper right quadrant where you need to be the expert. Right. So in order to get that funding, where does that come from? So I can build you a budget to do those things. So it's more about, what are your top priorities this year? How much money does it take? Here's how I think I can get you that funding for free. So that is a good way to kind of look at it, because, and I told you, people don't get excited about saving money. They get excited about their projects, so it's people get paid the big dollars for innovating and coming up with new things. So it's like, if you're working on RPA or machine learning, or, better processes, or a new marketing technique that's going to up your close ratio 4%, like those things are exciting that people get excited about. But the saving money part, I think, is more to fund those things. So that's the hard part, is getting people to understand that, hey, for us to work together, I don't need you to do jumping jacks and be excited about saving the money. Right. But I just want you to trust that I have a process, and I'll show them this is the process that I do, and tell them what it is. Chances are they won't have the resources, time, or energy to do it. And if they're not excited about it, they're not going to do it anyway. So why don't you outsource that anyway? Why not outsource it anyway? There's no risk to that. So to me, it's a no-brainer. But oddly, I don't get, my inbox full of people saying, can we hire you tomorrow? So
yeah, well, there's a huge trust factor there, right? Because at any time, if you've gotten a company to even 2 million in revenue, you've had your fair share of disappointments with relationships and employees and all of those things, right? You've opened your books to somebody and they've taken advantage of that and stolen clients or done some unethical stuff. So I can see that holding those books really near and dear to your heart, but you can go in as a project basis, not necessarily look at the whole company, right? Is that true, or am I overspeaking that?
So, and that's how I try to get engaged with clients too, is I don't always go to the CFO to get a agreement to work for the entire firm. Right. Instead, my target is a vice president or senior vice president that manages their own P&L for their expense area. So then I can go to somebody who just manages the facilities or is just, responsible for the marketing budget. And then I get projects working with them. So why they need to trust me is that I don't want to just do that one project. I want them to become my advocate and say, hey, Bob in HVAC, you got to talk to Darrell. Or get me up to the CFO and say, here's what Darrell was able to do in performance. We should probably look at this as doing a corporate-wide job. So that's the benefit for me, and why I need to do a good job with it is I can't be a one-time, superstar. It's got to be an ongoing thing as the objective and goal.
Right. And I think for the audience, the really great tip there is if you're trying to get into one of the big companies, don't think that you have to get to the CFO or the CFO, CEO, CFO. You can get even director level buy-in, right? So when you're picking a target company that you're going to try to get to provide services to, really look at the entire company. Don't just have one target in that company. Talk to everybody you possibly can, because they talk to each other, and you can get a small job in there and then work your way up through the ranks. Because I know some of those big companies, I've got a couple of major big name clients, and it's really challenging to get through the corporate bureaucracy of those companies. But once you're an approved vendor, then all those other departments open up to you as well.
Yeah, and being an approved vendor isn't always, rainbows and unicorns either. So like part of what I'm looking for is I want to have a good working experience as well. And it's like you said, trust and relationship is required in order for me to have a good engagement.
Right.
So if I can get that trust and that relationship going well with a vice president, then that's going to help our project go well. On the other hand, if I go to the CFO and the CFO says, yes, we're going to hire Rhino Consulting Partners, and you 8 people all work with Darrell on your projects, they'll be like, wait, what? No, we're fine. We didn't want to work with him. What's going on here? And so I get pushback, I get flack, I get short, long turnarounds for basic information. Okay. And it becomes a big pain, where I'd rather work the smaller project to start that is fun and more engaging to work on, and then build from there. It would just give me a better life, so that's kind of what I want to do too.
I would imagine specifically with what you're doing, because they're opening their books and being told, for it to work, you have to be transparent on both sides, right? Or it just doesn't work. And if you didn't have manager buy-in from a department, that would be wildly challenging. It's the same thing in IT when you're trying to implement a new process. If you don't have employee buy-in or manager buy-in, you might as well just throw the project away. It's just not going to be adopted, right? So it's going to be hurdle after hurdle, and it's just not the funnest thing in the world to do. So going back to the other side of the world, we've been talking, I think, 10 million and up companies, right? Kind of in that ballpark. But we have a lot of people out there that are smaller, medium-sized businesses, anywhere between $250,000 to $3 million in revenue. And they could probably use cost-saving negotiating stuff more than the big companies that are like, oh yeah, that's a sunk cost. We're not going to worry about that because we keep moving forward. Do you have any tips or tricks for that smaller company that, maybe the juice isn't worth the squeeze for you to come in and help them out versus, what they're currently doing? What are some of the ways that they can maybe save money today?
All right. So 2 things I'll say is one, you probably do need to learn negotiation as a skill. So you can do that 1,000 different ways. But the key part is to practice it, because I think of negotiation as a skill that you need to practice to learn. So you could read the best sales book in the world and not close your first sale, right? Or read a book on how to pick up women and not be any good at it if you never go to a bar and give it a shot. So what you need to do is learn that piece as a skill, and think of it as like something good to have in your toolkit. You want to understand a little bit about marketing, because these small companies, you're a jack of all trades.
Right.
Make good negotiation be one of those skills that you learn. And 2, I think that you need to understand what the strategic sourcing framework is. And that's something I can help all your listeners with. So I have a website that I have set up for them. It's at rhinoconsultingpartners.com/clicks and bricks. Okay.
Awesome. And we'll throw that right down in the comments.
Yeah. They could put their email address in there, and I'll send them out a PDF that outlines kind of the 10,000 foot level of what that playbook looks like for strategic sourcing. Okay.
Okay.
And there's and it gives a, it's like 15 pages or something. So it's not going to be like a crazy long thing. And I'd be happy to help any of your listeners too, if they wanted to talk shop about it. I can't make a living, talking to these people, but I'd be happy to do that for your listener base as well.
Right.
But it's three main steps. Is first, you need to do a spend analysis on where your money is going. And I promise you that if you do this for your own household budget, you're going to go, I spend how much at Amazon and how much eating out? Like, you'll be surprised with how much you're spending. So these companies are going to find out they spend more than they think they do, and they're using more than one vendor to deliver a same solution as well. Okay. Especially if you have multiple people in the organization running their own P&Ls, then you're going to get a lot of sporadic spend. Right. So that spend analysis needs to show where you need to put every vendor into a category, just like you would a household budget. So is it janitorial services or office supplies, whatever it is. And then you look at how much spend you have versus the average spend per vendor and how many vendors you have, and assess, like, what do you think that market opportunity is based off of whether you've ever negotiated before, whether you even have a contract. So all those things are red flags that, hey, you probably should look at this. So right. You can put it on a 2x2 quadrant, which will be in the PDF, of spend versus project opportunity. And then when you get things up in the upper right quadrant, which is our magic quadrant here, those are the ones that you should look at further. Okay. Right. So then step 2 would be doing a contract analysis if you have one. So if you have a contract, to look at it, when's the last time you negotiated it? Do you have terms in there for price increases? Do you have an exhibit with what the pricing is? And, all those things to see what your opportunity is, because you might be in a situation where you can't negotiate the contract, or when it makes sense to you. So if you're in that 5-year lease, know that you got to start looking at that lease options in 4 years, not in 5, because if you look at it 30 days before, you're going to be stuck with whatever they offer you because you don't have options. Right. So if you're using a software as an example, if it was going to take you 9 months to plan for, to lift and shift that to another software, you got to make sure you're at a decision point 9 months before the end of that contract. Otherwise, you'll be stuck having to renew and you have no choice. So you're building out the plan of where you're going from that point. And then step 3 is the really big step, but that's the strategic sourcing process. But that's figuring out what your requirements are, writing an RFP, sending it out. And, there's a little bit of this where it's like going to the gym, where if I go to the gym and move around and break a sweat, I'll probably get in better health. Not the best health I could get into, but doing something, at least asking to get quotes back on a 2-page RFP is better than doing nothing, Right. Better than, so it's like some RFPs are 25, 30 pages long. You don't have to do that if you don't have the time and resources, but it's advisable if you do. You could find, templates online, I'm sure, that you could use. Right. Make yourself look fancier than you are.
So in negotiation, I look at it as I have 2 primary tools that I use: my money and their time, right? So if I'm in a lease that I don't like, and I can, cost every single month, and I call them and I'm like, hey, I want to talk about this lease. And I might take 2 or 3 hours of their legal's time, right? When I'm trying to just talk about different options. And you'd be surprised when you start taking the legal time, you're not rude or anything. You're just really trying to work out a solution that they'll be more accommodating to you. On the funds, I really like to say, hey, what if I prepaid for the year? If you can't get a discount for prepaying somebody for the year, that you've probably hit the sweetest spot that you can get by you're paying monthly, right? Because people like money, right? Would those 2 tactics be something that you would agree with or kind of stray away from?
Yeah, and it would depend on the company too, because when you get in large corporations, on your side, you got to figure out what that capital cost is for you. So you want to have a good working capital number that you're keeping within your firm. So it depends on what the firm uses. I've seen 3%, I've seen 12%. So if it's 12%, you don't want to prepay it. You're probably not going to be able to get a discount. But if your working capital number's low, 3-4%, then yeah, by all means, get prepayment. And you can also work with your credit card supplier if you have a P card program. Figure out how, working with them, you can get a rebate program by paying by credit card. Let the other firm pay you by credit card. You'll get some points back on that, and you can extend your terms back on them. So I've done it before where I had upwards of 6 months of float time to pay on a P card. And so you work a deal out on one side to get discounts for it. you're still paying for it in 6 months anyway.
Right. Absolutely. And you can amortize that out over the 6 months, or by then you can get another gap loan and stretch it out even further if you want to or need to. Yeah, there's a ton of different options out there. I find it interesting when somebody's like, oh, I can't do it because I asked once and they said no, right? That's not, it's not very entrepreneurial at the end of the day. So, Darrell, I've had a great time talking with you. If somebody wanted to work with you, how would they get in contact with you?
Best way is to email me. So we'll put my email in the show notes here, but it's first initial, last name, D Stempke at rhinoconsultingpartners.com. And I assume that the people that would be reaching out would be those people in the $250 to $3 million range where they're looking for advice on what to do. But if you have a situation where you're getting letters from your vendors giving you price increases all the time, which is a huge problem right now,
yes,
and you don't have the time or resources to do it, that is a huge symptom that you need someone like me to help you. Okay? Because the thing is when you have a price increase of 8%, they were told to do 8% to everybody. So Amazon, who they have the best pricing in the world, is going to 8%. And then Joe's Bait and Tackle is also going up 8%. Right. The problem is you don't know what you're getting as far as market price is concerned. So it could be that they're raising you at 8% when you're already 25% over market. So there's, price increase letters, get a response of, okay, we're going to have to take this to RFP. And right. I can be the person that does that for you.
That is fantastic. So if you're looking for services, you're getting ready to make big purchases, Rhino Consulting Partners is your team.
That's the way to go.
Fantastic. Would you like to leave the audience with any tips, tricks, or words of wisdom before we go?
Sure. So I'll give you one more tip, is that when you're negotiating, silence is your friend. Okay. So if you gave me 10 minutes to prepare you for negotiation, I would tell you, write down 10 questions that you think will help you uncover what your other party's interests are. Okay. And then 2, use silence. Silence is so uncomfortable for people. I wouldn't be able to leave 5 seconds of silence on this podcast because you'd freak out. Right. But when you use silence, it really creates tension, and tension's a good thing. They will fill the air of the silence. So when you ask a question and they answer it, wait longer, and they will continue to talk. So when you're trying to uncover what are the 7 different options, just leave it there. When you say, this is my best and final price, just kind of wait, and they will give you something else. So silence is your friend. Get comfortable with it. Get comfortable with it.
They generally do. I've had a couple of situations in my life where we just both sat and looked at each other for about 15, 20 minutes before one of us broke. But that's it's very not a common scenario. That's only happened to me with lawyers. They're better at it than I am. So,
and I will break the silence to make them talk. So instead of breaking silence to talk, I will ask a question or say, I'm waiting for your opinion on this. Right. I'll just push it back to them. And then if they keep being quiet, I'll know what they're doing. So it's like when you know all the gambits, you just counter them and say, look, I think you're trying to be silent here to make me uncomfortable to talk, but I'm going to sit here and wait until you tell me what your response is to my question. I'll just tell them what I know they're doing. So that'll help diffuse the effort for it. It's like good cop, bad cop. If you identify, oh, so are you bad cop today? They'll kind of be like, all right, fine. It's like once you identify what they're doing, they'll back off it usually.
Fantastic. That if nothing else is a good icebreaker, right? It might be a good story, hopefully later at the bar.
Yep.
So fantastic. Thank you, Darrell. I very much appreciate your time today.
All right. Have a great one. Thank you.
That's it for today's show, folks. If you'd like to join my text line community, the number is 314-370-2871. All you have to do to join that text line is send me any question about business or technology. I'll do all the research, and I'll give you an absolutely free, totally unbiased answer. Get to work.